The commercial greenhouse nursery is a busy place. There are cuttings to make and plant, seeds to grow, plants to water and fertilize, finished specimens to select for shipment, and there are pests to control. Since the greenhouse is an enclosed space, pest control is different than in the field. Chemicals sprayed in an enclosed area behave differently from ones applied out of doors. The kind of growing situation plus the nature of the crop may make it necessary to use pesticides frequently in the greenhouse. For example, corn foliage can sustain a lot of damage without the value of the crop being affected. But if similar damage occurs on the foliage of ornamentals, the saleability of the plants will be seriously reduced, because with ornamentals, appearance is what counts. A greenhouse environment produces tender, succulent growth that is especially attractive to insects, mites, and disease-producing microorganisms. Because there's typically a large number of different plants growing in the nursery, there's a wide variety of pests likely to find a desirable host. This makes pest control a constant battle. Many nurseries buy plant material from other parts of the country and abroad. It's not unusual to receive a shipment of infested plants, thus introducing new pests into the greenhouse. Since the greenhouse is enclosed, pesticides don't disperse as rapidly as when spraying is done outside. The use of a ventilation system helps get residues out of the house, but slow dispersal must be considered when determining how soon workers can re-enter the facility following treatment. Often it's necessary to handle the plants soon after treatment, so re-entry time is an important consideration when choosing a chemical. The rule for re-entry into a greenhouse after application with most pesticides is that normal work can be resumed as soon as the foliage dries or the dust settles. However, some products have re-entry intervals of 24 or 48 hours, or even longer. If it's necessary to handle treated plants sooner, the use of such a product may be undesirable. If the air residues from a treated house are being pulled out through wall fans, people should be warned to stay away from the exhaust. Furthermore, the applicator should be instructed to watch out for anyone standing near the exhaust fans. The possibility of fan-aggravated pesticide drift from nearby greenhouses must also be considered when setting up outdoor work areas. Reduced dispersal is only one of the factors which affect pesticide persistence in the greenhouse. Ultraviolet light is very important in the breakdown of some of the most commonly used pesticides. Since glass and some plastics block ultraviolet rays, chemical decomposition may be delayed. The temperature inside the greenhouse is likely to be different than the temperature outside, and this may also affect the way that some pesticides decompose. What all of this means is that pesticides are likely to break down more slowly in the greenhouse. This must be kept in mind when scheduling pest control applications. Unlike most field-grown crops, greenhouse plants are labor-intensive. Workers have considerable skin contact with foliage and soil during potting, disbudding, cutting, and even watering. This intimate contact increases the possibility of pesticide exposure from recently treated foliage and soil. This creates potential strategical problems. That is, a grower may find himself in a position of needing to spray a crop and perform some operations such as picking or disbudding within a very limited time frame. If the operations are not carefully coordinated, workers could be sent to handle plants too soon after treatment. On the other hand, an ill-planned application could result in delaying a necessary activity, which in turn leads to serious economic losses because an important deadline has been missed. Either steam or fumigants can be used to sterilize the growing medium. Methyl bromide and, to a lesser extent, formaldehyde are used for soil fumigation. Methyl bromide is highly toxic in terms of both acute exposure and long-term or chronic effects. Formaldehyde is considerably less toxic, but can affect health over a long period of exposure. When chemical sterilization is used, it's essential that all of the chemical dissipate before the medium is handled. This means that after the tarp is removed, the soil should be aerated, and a prescribed time should pass before it's used. The product label should indicate how long to wait before using treated soil. There are residue detection devices which can be used to determine when the soil is safe to use. Since fumigants are toxic to plants as well as to humans, there's a double incentive for waiting the prescribed time. The types of applications made in the greenhouse can lead to safety problems for the applicator and for other workers. For example, many ornamental nurseries grow plants in hanging baskets. If proper precautions are not taken after watering treated baskets, pesticide residues could drip onto workers. If a granular material such as Temic is applied, a granule could fall out of a basket and land on the skin or in the mouth of someone working below. It's also essential to develop a plan for treating hanging baskets, which allows the applicator to walk down the narrow greenhouse aisles and treat the plants without coming in contact with runoff. Some nurseries choose to take down their hanging baskets before treating them. In a smaller operation, this may be practical, but in a larger nursery, or in one where there's no extra space, this is not possible. One way the applicator can avoid contact with the pesticide is by walking down one row while spraying the plants hanging over the adjacent row. Then, while backing out of the aisle, the worker can spray the plants in front of him. This way, no time is lost, since the applicator is spraying one row on the way in and another one on the way out. Greenhouse cucumbers and other tall plants present a similar problem. To avoid getting dripped on, the sprayer should walk all the way into the aisle and then start spraying while backing out. To keep residue from tall plants and hanging baskets from dripping on workers, the manager should never have anyone work under freshly treated plants or recently treated plants that have just been watered. When possible, the use of highly toxic granular materials such as Temic in overhead baskets should be avoided. If such an application is necessary, no one should work under the plants until they've been watered several times and the active ingredient has been washed off the granular carrier. Frequently, handheld equipment is used for weed control and for spot treatments. Since the worker is in direct contact with the pesticide tank, it must be kept in good condition. A leaky tank could contaminate the applicator, and a corroded tank or a weakened hose may explode during pressurization. To avoid accidents, high-quality equipment should be purchased, and the applicator should be trained to inspect it on a regular basis. He or she must learn where the potential danger points are. Also, when buying hoses, for instance, attention should be paid to bursting strength. Under most circumstances, pesticide application should not be made while there are people working in the greenhouse. Most nurseries avoid this by spraying in the early morning or after working hours. Some greenhouse ranges are comprised of several connected houses. If the range is quite large and the ventilation system is built so that the spray will not be pulled through the parts of the range outside the target area, it may be safe to work in one part of the house while an application is taking place in another part. For example, there are ranges set up so that a pair of cooling pads divides the house into sections. Since each section has its own air supply, a spray application can take place in one area with little or no drift into the other sections, especially if each one is separated by some kind of barrier. Nevertheless, it's better to keep people out of the sections adjacent to the one being treated. In greenhouses that share a common air supply, no one should be allowed in the house during a spray application. Some nurseries are set up to apply pesticides as well as fertilizers through pipelines. It's important that workers understand which lines are carrying poisonous materials so that they don't drink from them or use them for washing. Pesticide and fertilizer pipelines should be colored or otherwise marked to distinguish them from regular water lines. Faucets from these lines should be individually marked with warning signs. Hoses used for pesticide pipelines should also be marked. If not, someone could attach a hose used for chemicals to a line containing clear water and drink from it. To avoid such problems, many nurseries prohibit drinking from any water lines. If there are enough drinking faucets conveniently located, workers won't have to drink from pipelines not intended for that purpose. The nursery should have adequate pesticide storage facilities that are locked and accessible only by authorized personnel. A warning sign must be posted on the door. Signs that include a Spanish and English warning statement are available. The storage building should also be well lighted and adequately ventilated. Cool, dry, dark conditions are best for assuring a long shelf life for pesticides. However, no pesticide should be stored so long that its effectiveness becomes doubtful. All pesticides should be kept in their original packages with the label attached. If a container is leaking or ripped and the contents must be transferred, the new container must have all of the information on the original label and must be clearly marked. Sometimes old metal containers become corroded and begin to leak. Such a container should be disposed of safely. The local agricultural commissioner should be able to provide guidance to growers who need to get rid of unwanted pesticides. The storage and mixing area should be separate from the shipping room or the lunchroom. Pesticide storage areas always smell of pesticides, and it's unsafe to have employees unnecessarily exposed to the odor. Protective clothing and equipment should be stored separately from chemicals to prevent contamination. A large part of the nursery workforce is non-English speaking. This can lead to communication problems between management and labor. Also, many workers have had no previous experience working around plants. Therefore, they're unlikely to be aware of specific problems and dangers associated with the greenhouse unless they are pointed out to them. To further complicate matters, there's usually a large turnover of employees. This combination of language differences, lack of expertise, and a transient labor force can be a barrier to safe pesticide use. Managers and supervisors must recognize this and do whatever is necessary to teach all workers about the possible dangers and the precautions involved in working near pesticides. Employees must be taught that they should never use greenhouse water for drinking or washing. If there are special pipelines for pesticides, workers must be able to identify them. It must be stressed that when there are signs posted on the door prohibiting entrance into a treated greenhouse, these signs are there for their protection and must be obeyed. Workers must be warned to stay out of the greenhouse during pesticide applications. The applicator should likewise be aware of possible dangers and should be trained to take the proper precautions to prevent self-contamination and contamination of other workers. Greenhouses often have blind spots, so it may appear that everyone has left the greenhouse when in fact someone is still inside. The applicator must make sure that everyone is out before starting a treatment. Just to make sure that it is safe to spray, the applicator should always get clearance from the person in charge of the greenhouse before beginning. Often, pest control supervisors do not do the actual mixing, loading, and applying. These jobs are handled instead by workers under their supervision. Adequate training must be given to mixers, loaders, and applicators by the supervisor. Protective equipment must be provided by the company, and each applicator must understand the importance of using it. Workers should be given a clean place away from the pesticide storage area to store their equipment. The applicator should be given the responsibility of taking care of his or her own equipment. But it is up to the supervisor to make sure that everything is in working order. Respirators should fit correctly. Filters should be replaced frequently. Clothing should be washed after each use. And most important of all, the appropriate equipment must always be used. Now, there's always a temptation to take off uncomfortable clothing when it's hot and humid in the greenhouse. Sometimes an employee may not want to take the time to get some piece of required protective equipment which was left behind. Goggles can fog up in the damp greenhouse environment, and removing them may seem almost irresistible. But the worker must understand the dangers involved in working without proper protection, and the supervisor must make sure that workers adhere to the established safety rules. How can a nursery promote pesticide safety? Well, the first step is communication between managers and supervisors. In a small nursery with only a few employees, this is not difficult. But in larger nurseries, there are often different supervisors in charge of the various aspects of the business, such as sales, shipping, pest control, propagation, etc. The pest control manager must know what operations are scheduled before making a pest control decision. Other supervisors should know when and where a spray application is going to take place, so that spraying and other work is not scheduled in the same house and at the same time. Management should define priorities for supervisors in order to avoid conflict. For example, the nursery policy may be that pest control takes precedence over other operations, and that when spraying is necessary, production can wait. Frequent meetings between supervisors and managers are essential to a good understanding of the production goals of the nursery. Spray schedules should be discussed at these meetings, and if an unanticipated pesticide application is going to take place, special effort must be made to inform the supervisor in charge of the targeted house. Communication between management and workers is the next step. Workers should know when their greenhouses are scheduled for treatment. Warning signs should be clearly posted on the doors of treated houses, and these signs should be removed promptly when it is safe to enter. Some nurseries prefer to lock houses when it's unsafe to enter, but if the workers understand the significance of warning signs, this should not be necessary. Worker training is step number 3 on the road to pesticide safety. A program should be set up to train workers. Those who actually handle pesticides are most in need of safety training, but workers not directly involved in pest control should understand certain facts about pesticides too. For example, non-handlers as well as handlers should be able to recognize the symptoms of a pesticide poisoning. They should understand the ways in which pesticides can enter the body, know how to administer first aid to a poisoning victim, and know what to do in case of an emergency. Emergencies could include spills, fires, self-contamination, and contamination of other people. Management should set up a plan of action for emergency situations and train employees to take the proper steps when something unexpected occurs. The nursery should arrange emergency contacts. For instance, local clinics which can treat poisoning victims and spill teams which can be called upon when a spill occurs. Management and workers should know the phone number of the nearest poison control center where they can get information on emergency treatment of poisoning victims. The local fire department should have a list of the chemicals being stored on the nursery premises so that if a fire occurs in a storage area, firefighters will understand the level of danger and know what to expect. Emergency telephone numbers should be posted where they can be easily seen, and employees should be trained to call these numbers when needed. Everyone benefits when pesticides are handled safely. Employees feel more comfortable if they understand the chemicals that are being used around them and realize that management is concerned with protecting their health. Well-trained mixers, loaders, and applicators will be able to avoid accidents, which could cost them time lost from work because of illness. A well-designed safety program can reduce workmen's compensation expenses and eliminate the cost and inconvenience of running the nursery without the skills of employees who might otherwise miss work due to pesticide-related illnesses.